AMD or Qualcomm, which is a better semiconductor company to buy right now? Well, in today's episode, hopefully we can answer that. We're going to take a closer look at things like financial health, return to investors, growth opportunities, and so much more. So let's get started. All right, so like I mentioned, the two semiconductor companies we're going to look at are AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, with roughly a market cap of $147 billion, and Qualcomm, ticker QCOM, with roughly a market cap of $133 billion. So in forms of market size, they're both in the similar size bracket or around there. I do want to say I own both these companies, so I'm not, AMD is a bigger position in my portfolio, but I do own both in my portfolio, and I have no intentions of selling either. But now I'm kind of wondering, hey, which one should I continue to add on? So I decided to create this video. So first, I want to say, let's take a closer look at things like their financial health and go on from there. So the first thing I want to look at are things like free cash flow, cash and short-term investments, and total long-term debt. Right off the bat, we can see that both these companies are positive in free cash flow. Before we go any further, I want to thank you for watching, and I need your help to reach my goal of 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you can do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and thumbs up. Also, if you want some fantastic insight into the semiconductor industry, join my other channel, Semiconductor Investing and More, where I use my electrical engineering background to break down the semiconductor market. Finally, I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for their subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode. AMD comes in with roughly $3 billion in free cash flow. Qualcomm, on the other hand, seems to be a really free cash flow machine with roughly $8 billion. So if we look at free cash flow, both are great, which is great news. But now when we take a closer look at things like cash and short-term investment, AMD tends to have more cash than debt. So obviously net positive there in its balance sheet, where Qualcomm has more debt than cash. Regardless, we did see that both these companies are positive in cash flow, have a nice amount of cash in their balance sheet. But if we were to kind of look at balance sheet purely, AMD definitely has a better balance sheet, but that the Qualcomm's balance sheet is not completely horrible, right? Like we saw that huge amount of cash and short-term investments of roughly $8 billion and roughly $8 billion in free cash flow. It wouldn't be a company I would lose sleep about them going under anytime soon. So next, I want to take a closer look at price to free cash flow. I think for semiconductor companies, this might be a little bit better metric to look at, or maybe EV to EBITDA ratio is another one that's pretty interesting. Advanced Micro Devices, obviously a lot more expensive, sitting at roughly 46.26 since July of 2021. I want to say it's nowhere, it's not near its peak, but it's a little bit higher than its average. So AMD, to some extent, investors are a little bit less worried. They do believe this probably has a lot more growth opportunities, and we can see it in its valuation. When it comes to Qualcomm, price to free cash flow is roughly at 16.9 right now, a little bit on the lower end. So in forms of valuation, we could see that Qualcomm might be looking a little bit more attractive. One thing to understand is, right, we are kind of in this PC downturn, and I want to say AMD is probably taking a bigger blunt on their free cash flow at the moment, because I do believe the PC market, which is a big market for AMD, is a lot weaker than the mobile market is, which is the main market for Qualcomm. So maybe investors are kind of expecting that to return, and maybe we kind of see a contraction in AMD's price to free cash flow valuation. But obviously we can see Qualcomm is definitely sitting at very, very attractive levels, even compared to its previous values as well. Next, I want to take a closer look at forms of returns to investments in buybacks and dividends. AMD does come in with a nice amount of buybacks in the past trailing 12 months, roughly $4.1 billion in buybacks, where Qualcomm comes in with roughly $2.9 billion. So both companies are buying back shares, which is great. Even though Qualcomm has lower buybacks, it does come in with roughly $3.2 billion in dividends. So Qualcomm is one that's buying back shares and is also paying back dividends. And together, those two are adding more value than AMD in just buybacks, right? So we can see both companies still looking pretty good in my opinion. Decent balance sheets and a great balance sheet. We saw nice positive free cash flow. We're also seeing a nice kind of return to shareholders in forms of buybacks and dividends. And you guys can see why I don't mind holding both positions. So it's definitely a tricky situation here. Next, I wanted to take a closer look at revenue growth. Historically, AMD in the most recent quarter grew 16% year over year. I do want to give a quick asterisk and be like, hey, AMD made an acquisition recently, and that's why it is showing positive year over year growth. If not, this would have been in the negative downturn. Qualcomm is down roughly 11% versus a year ago. And when we take a closer look at now kind of the estimations for this upcoming quarter, both companies are expected to go down on a year-over-year basis. Qualcomm a little bit more, but again, it is mainly because AMD does have that acquisition that's kind of helping it a little bit compared to previous levels. But we can see right now the semiconductor market is still in a downturn. I want to say this is very cyclical. It's not like it's the end of the world for semiconductor companies. This is eventually going to grow back. So overall, I want to say it's very hard to kind of pick a winner from just financials. We saw AMD had a way better financial balance sheet with more cash than debt, but then we said Qualcomm with a better valuation. We also see Qualcomm with better returns to investors in forms of dividends and buybacks. Unfortunately, both are kind of in the downturn due to this semiconductor glut that we're still seeing happening globally. So next, what I want to see is maybe kind of determine who might give me better growth opportunities. So first, let's look at AMD and their kind of revenue breakdown. So AMD has 4 segments, and their 4 segments usually kind of are split up very evenly. We can see the data center, the client, the gaming, and the embedded. And what I like about AMD right now is it's not branded too much, or it's not too dependent into one market. And what I mean is, like, the old AMD, it was very dependent on the consumer space. And we can see that client revenue, which is that consumer space, was down 51% year over year. Now it has exposure to the data center market and to the embedded markets, which might show a little bit more strength than the consumer market. So I want to say it's a little bit more diversified. It has a little bit more of I want to say a standing ground for different cyclicalities in the semiconductor industries. So I like it, the diversification of AMD and how it's not too dependent in the consumer market as it used to be, and maybe that's why investors are willing to give it a better price. The two things that I'm super excited are actually the embedded and the data center market. Both these are markets that have high margins. We can see the embedded segment has operating margins of roughly 50% in the most recent quarter, and the data center market, which I have right here, has operating margins of roughly 27%. So both these segments are one that I believe will continue to grow with things like AI. The embedded market is great for automotive, for aerospace and defense, and a lot of industrial workloads, which I believe will also continue to grow. So those two markets have great margins, and I believe we're going to continue to see. One thing that's hurting AMD a lot right now is their client segment. This is their consumer products, their CPU products for PCs. We can see that this is seeing such a huge over inventory correction that revenue dropped 51% and operating margins went from positive 30% to negative 17%. So right now we're definitely seeing a weakness here, and this is why I believe AMD has a higher valuation, because when this picks back up, this is definitely going to help the nice amount of free cash flow for AMD, and it's going to create a contraction on those valuations that we're looking at earlier. So in forms of opportunity, I do enjoy AMD a lot in different markets, especially the data center space. Now, when we take a look at Qualcomm, we can see they have 3 revenue segments, but it's mainly driven by one space, the handset. And the handset is more mobile, that's more consumer based. So we can see Qualcomm has a lot more dependency on the consumer market. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I do believe mobile industry is going to continue to grow, and the solutions that Qualcomm provides, like the connectivity, the chips that go with Wi-Fi, and with numerous things like satellite location, 5G, the new Wi-Fi 7 as well. So the growth opportunities is there. It's just going to be more dependent on the consumer market, which is expected to kind of see some weakness. Overall, though, the other markets, even though they are small, they are growing. We can see how automotive grew from 1.5 billion dollars in fiscal year of 2022 versus 1.1 billion in fiscal year of 2021. Internet of Things, everything is getting smarter. So I also enjoy that, and that grew by roughly $2 billion in a year. A nice, I want to say maybe 40% on a year-over-year basis for the full year. So we can see huge growth opportunities for Qualcomm. Internet of Things is still in early phases, in my opinion. We're going to see smart everything, smart toasters, smart lights, smart cities, smart cars. So overall, Qualcomm definitely has growth opportunities. Unfortunately, it is a little bit more dependent on the consumer side at the moment. So if I had to choose one, I think right now at current levels, Qualcomm might be the better value play if we're looking at kind of some form of which one might provide the best returns in the next year or two. I do believe in forms of huge growth opportunities. I enjoy AMD. The great thing about Qualcomm, though, it does come with that dividend. It does come with a nice amount of buybacks. Unfortunately, it comes with that consumer exposure. So like I said, I have both in my portfolio. AMD is already a big position, so right now I think what's also driving that for me to purchase more Qualcomm is to increase my exposure, especially at current valuations. If AMD was cheaper, I think AMD would have easily won this because of that diversification and the exposure to the data center market. But I enjoy both companies. Let me know in the comments below, which one do you think should win? Do you prefer AMD over Qualcomm at current prices? In the long term, I do believe both will win. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and take care.